You are listening to the Everything Ham Radio podcast. This is episode number 29. Today we're going to be talking about mesh nets. We're going to be talking about Lake of the Ozarks Amateur Radio Club a little bit later. And also we're going to find out how to enter this week's raffle. So stay tuned. This is Curtis with the Everything Ham Radio podcast. Today we're going to be talking with David Erickson, Kilo Bravo 5 Uniform Golf Foxtrot. We're going to be talking about something that I talked a little bit about on one of my blog posts about a year ago or so. And I believe I've actually done a little something on a previous podcast too, if I'm not mistaken. But anyways, we're going to be talking about MeshNet, or basically using off the store shelf routers to connect using amateur radio frequencies in a network. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do, and I'm sure that David will be able to explain it a whole lot more than I can. So, David, why don't you say hello to everybody, tell us a little about yourself, and we'll go from there.
Well, hi, everybody. My name is David Erickson, KB5UGF. I'm a ham radio operator with a general class ticket. I've been licensed since 1994. As a technician for most of that time, I upgraded in 2013 to general. And I've gravitated towards this niche facet of ham radio on the upper UHF and microwave bands, using broadband data transmission in the form of mesh networking. I've also dabbled with some HF work. I've got pretty much all bands covered here. I've got an HF rig, 2 meter, 220 and 440 rig here, and a group of antennas up between 30 and 42 feet up. It covers just about every band from 80 meters up through the 13 centimeter ham band.
If you remember way back, I believe it's going to be in episode number 2, I think. We did a Amateur Radio Club spotlight on the Mansfield Johnson Amateur Radio Service. Yeah, it's episode 1. You can listen to it at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/1, and that's the number 1. Towards the end of that episode, actually, I believe it's going to be in the middle of that episode, we did a spotlight on that. And David, correct me if I'm wrong, you're a member of that club?
That is correct. Yeah, I sure don't want to leave that out. I am a member of the Mansfield Johnson Amateur Radio Service, located in Mansfield, and you can go to our website at WA5JRS, Whiskey Alpha 5 Romeo Juliet Sierra, WA5JRS.com, and read more about the club, or even email them at WA5JRS. At W5JRS.com too. We have members all over southeast Tarrant County, northern Johnson County. I guess a smattering of a few from Ellis and other places. Western Dallas County, we get some folks come down from HEB. It's HEB area. Wow. It's a good bunch of folks. Y'all are certainly welcome to come and visit us sometime.
Very cool. So, let's go ahead and get started with the topic of today. Mesh nets. Do a better job explaining what a mesh net is than I did.
Okay, well, a mesh network, and by the way, the technology is not terribly new. It's been around in use by civilian and government agencies for probably a couple decades now. It's basically, in the case that we're using it, it's a digital network, and by digital, it could be computers, it could be cameras, it could be phones, anything that could be digitized. It's a collection of these devices that are hooked together in what's known as an ad hoc network. But unlike a lot of other ad hoc networks where every device has to be able to see every other device, with a mesh network, It's only got to see the next device or node down the path. And then the routing software that operates behind the scenes passes that traffic on to the next node in line until eventually your data reaches the destination point. So basically it's an ad hoc network. If you can just picture like a spider web or a mesh that you would use to tie down cargo with, a group of nodes where traffic can pass between whatever nodes it needs to get to its destination. What makes a ham mesh network unique is it does operate on ham radio frequencies that either are also Wi-Fi, Part 15 Wi-Fi frequencies, or are they spectrally nearby Wi-Fi frequencies. And the equipment we use, as Curtis alluded to, is modified off-the-shelf with what they call COTS, or consumer off-the-shelf equipment that can be modified to go out of the Wi-Fi band yet remain in the ham band. So in many cases, these mesh nets are set up on ham-only frequencies where there's not interference from Part 15 users, and that's the key right there in congested urban and suburban areas where there's a lot of Wi-Fi. Is we don't have to deal with that Part 15 noise, and it allows us to go many miles with these low-powered devices that are typically only about 2/3 of 1 watt. So that's basically what a mesh net is, as opposed to, say, your office network or your home network or the internet, all of which are other data networks, of course.
Now, using ham radio frequencies for this connection, can we use more power than the regular consumer can?
We sure can if we choose. We can use, I'm not sure what the limit is on the upper UHF and microwave. It's much, much more than we would ever need. But more power is not generally a good thing with microwave energies because of a number of reasons. Well, first of all, there's a safety factor. If you look at your exposure limits at those frequencies, I don't even stand in front of a 2/3 of a watt and a 24 dB gain antenna for any length of time, because these are the same frequencies your microwave ovens operate at. And the big reason also, the other big reason, is you really don't get much bang for the buck by increasing your power through amplification. It's always better to increase the EIRP, your effective power, with a better antenna. And that not only gives you a better transmitted signal, but it also increases your receiving capability uniformly. So if you just put an amplifier on it, you end up with an alligator radio. You're getting out all over the place, but you're not hearing any of the people that are trying to talk back to you. So generally, we stick with the maximum stock power that these units come with, and we rely on other tricks like better antennas, proper positioning of those antennas, aligning the channel to make best use of the spectrum. We operate on a 10 megahertz wide channel, whereas Wi-Fi operates on a 20 megahertz wide channel.
Wow.
Typically, that gives us a 3 dB bump right there. Plus, it's a matter of necessity on this 2.4 gigahertz band because we are sandwiched in right below the bottom of the Wi-Fi band, but yet have to remain inside the ham band. So we only have about 12 megahertz to play with. So we operate on a 10 megahertz wide channel to stay within those bounds.
So, sticking with routers for just a second, what routers are available for that you can buy that are consumer grade to use within a mesh network?
That's a very good question, and let me preface that with just a little history on how this whole thing started. Way back in the early days of Wi-Fi routers, which really the technology is not that old. I'm thinking late 90s or so, when the bands were realigned and router makers started building these mostly low power, mostly designed for inside use routers. Well, Cisco Linksys used an open source software or firmware package in theirs, and they were selling it under their license. Well, with the open source community, I can't remember the exact organization. Somebody can correct me on this. There's an actual organization that oversees the Linux open source movement around worldwide. Well, they contacted Linksys and said, "Hey, this cannot be proprietary. You have to open this up if you're going to use it in your product." So, henceforth, those routers by Linksys and some others that were basically copying the technology that were selling these routers with this open source firmware left the door open for experimenters to tweak with this firmware and modify it to do things that the manufacturer hadn't built into the device. So that's kind of how it was all born. And I guess the Linksys router, because it used Broadcom chips, which were easily modifiable, and because there were millions of them out there, basically every office had 2 or 3 or more of them, and home consumers started using them around their house. So those little small blue Linksys routers with the 2 antennas on it became ubiquitous with the open source movement. And you saw groups like OpenWRT and DDWRT and Tomato pop up, which were groups of hackers, if you will, computer and networking geeks, developed these packages that you could burn into the firmware. You could flash the firmware with that gave these things extra capability. Well, then the ham radio guys started taking notice that, hey, we have all these forms of digital ham radio, but they're slow. If you look at your speed charts for digital communications from HF, it's appallingly slow. And you get up into VHF, it gets a little better. UHF, even better than that. But when you get up into this 13 centimeter, 2.4 gigahertz band on up, it's wide open territory. Basically, there's probably a limit if there is. I don't know what it is. I think basically the limit is whatever the technology you ride on those frequencies with can handle. With 802.11n technology, you're talking about 130 megabits per second capability, which is going to be probably about 2 to 3 times faster than the fastest home internet connection you could ever have. So, the Linksys gave way. Linksys became the cornerstone of the ham community's involvement with using this open source firmware to use it for ham radio. And an organization out of Austin known as Broadband Hamnet, and there are others around the world and around the country that had similar approaches and had their own firmware, but BBHN was probably the best known. They used the modules from OpenWRT and branded them for ham radio usage by basically putting a graphic user interface that was ham radio purpose driven on the firmware, and then also incorporating an automatic routing protocol known as OLSR, or Optimized Link State Routing. And this is a daemon type program or a behind the scenes type program that, like I've mentioned at the first part of the podcast, automatically routes your traffic. The ham doesn't need to know where the traffic, what route the traffic needs to take. This routing protocol automatically does it for them. So for years, or maybe about half a decade, the Linksys routers were the staple of the mesh networking community, but they were low power. They were designed to be inside. So if you needed to get any sort of distance, they had to be outside, up near the antenna, in a weatherproof enclosure. They were only 79 milliwatts, which it's not much power. Although I think the world record for Wi-Fi communication was actually it's still held by a Chilean group that they were in the Andes Mountains on two different mountain ranges using Linksys routers with stock power. It was like 239 kilometers or something like that. You might have to check me on that distance, but it was just an enormously long distance using these 79 milliwatt routers. Now, keep in mind, again, this is an example of where power is not, raw power is not the answer, but the antenna is. They were using some modified C-band satellite dishes for their antennas. You know, these are like 6 to 8 foot dishes. So that's how they were getting their gain. So, yeah, and it works. It wasn't a permanent link, but it set a record.
Yeah. So I'm guessing if I'm kind of understand what you're explaining a little bit, the mesh net is kind of like a generation 2 of what packet was back in the 90s and 2000, and even there's still some packet used today. Have you ever dealt with packet?
Yes, I have, and that would be a good analogy. It's the next iteration of digital ham communications. In fact, there are utilities like Mesh Chat that we use that are very packet-like in nature, with some extra bells and whistles. It's like you can do file transfers with it and things very quickly too, I might add, obviously with the bandwidth we have. People these days, hams even, emergency coordinators, MCOM folks, are used to using digital devices, cell phones, computers, phones, digital phones, you name it, fax machines. You can do fax over the mesh. So when conventional systems fail, they don't want to have to hand transcribe a note, have it dictated by a ham over an HF frequency to another ham who transcribes it back to a form and then passes it on to the recipient. That's Pony Express days. So this is exactly, and it's not a quick way to dispense large amounts of information in a disaster. Which I must bring up. I know I'm diverging. I never actually finished your last question. I know I'm going to get back to it. But I want to emphasize that the main focus and selling point, if you will, of mesh networking is the fact that it's MCOM driven. It's designed to supplement emergency communications when all else fails. Internet is known to go down. We had a widespread power outage a couple of years ago. And the telcos have backup batteries, which is great, but they last about 6 hours, and then those batteries are gone. Then what do you do? Well, I've got a bank of 3 batteries with a 100-watt solar panel. All my radios run on it. All my computer gear runs on it. I'm not affected by any of that. I may have to scale back some of my usage if we've got short, cloudy days, several of them in a row. But I'm going to be on the air still, so. That's what drives this whole project, is the fact that we can supplement emergency communications when conventional routes fail, and that's also a big selling point to help get these mesh nodes put in prominent high places, with the help of municipal and county governments. If we can show them that this thing can help them in times of disaster, with some examples. So that's an important facet. But if I may go back to your previous question about the equipment, back to the Linksys, some people are still using those, but like I mentioned, they're very low power. They're not environmentally robust. But this company, and I believe they're out of San Jose, somewhere in Northern California, Ubiquity Networks has developed, they actually have several lines of equipment, but their AirMax line of equipment, most of those devices are supported by, Broadband Hamnet and now the Arden Group, AREDN, which was an offshoot of Broadband Hamnet, and I can elaborate on that in a little too, if you like. They are environmentally robust. They can operate in temperatures from just an unbelievable range of like minus 40 degrees to 160 or even hotter degrees Fahrenheit. They can withstand high humidity. They're in radiation resistant as far as like UV resistant enclosures. And many of them, they've got a whole line of different usage type devices, but many of them have integrated antennas built in. So you basically just strap one of these devices on a pole and get it up in the air, and you run an Ethernet cable to it that's powered, what they call power over Ethernet, and you're on the air with a node. Of course, after you flash it with the appropriate firmware. So Ubiquity, Ubiquiti on the end, that's the company name. You can Google it and read all about the Air Max series. Not every one of them is supported, and not everyone is desirable. There's a couple low power devices which are fairly inexpensive. I would get the full power, the ones that are rated at the full 600 milliwatts, which is what the FCC allows. That way, your transmitting power is going to pretty much balance out with your receiving sensitivity, and you're not going to be left with a radio that you can hear with, but you can't put out. So I use let's see, 1, 2, 3 different ones right now. I use the Ubiquity Bullet, which is just the radio with an end connector. You can put any kind of antenna on you want. I've got a 15 dB Omni stick that I use. And then here at the shack, at 42 feet, I've got one of those barbecue grill dishes, those parabolic grid dishes up at 42 feet, along with a camera below it. And that's on a 5-foot pole rotated by a TV antenna rotator. So I can move around and hit different nodes, and I can also move the camera around to view different weather events too. So, and that's all up at about 42 feet in the air with 2 sets of guy wires.
So do you have your...
so yeah, Ubiquity, and then...
Do you have your, the router and the antenna and stuff all up at the top of your tower, or do you have your router and stuff at the bottom and just the antenna up at the top?
The antenna and router are together at the top because of the high losses that are incurred at upper UHF and SHF frequencies. It's desirable to keep your coaxial runs as short as possible, or not at all. The Ubiquity devices that have the integrated antennas, there's no coax. The whole thing's one unit. It goes right from the antenna, the printed circuit board antenna probes inside right to the radio. It's all one circuit board. With the Ubiquity Bullet I use that has the end connector, there's about maybe a 1-foot piece of low loss, probably like LMR 600 or something. I'm not sure exactly what. It's really stiff, thick cable. And over 1 foot, I'm probably losing a couple of tenths of a decibel, just totally negligible. But yeah, like I said, most of the devices, the antenna is integrated inside it. Oh, the Rocket, which is another device, has 2 little micro pieces of hard line that go between it and the dish. They're about 6 inches long each. So loss is negligible if you keep the radio and the antenna together up at the antenna location.
Okay, so we have the Linksys router. You have the Ubiquity system, and is there any other routers that are built for this?
Well, there's a lot of open source type routers out there, but the Broadband Hamnet and now the Arden folks, like I said, they're the successors to Broadband Hamnet, are focusing mostly on Ubiquity, and now they support a couple devices by TP-Link. TP-Link has a series called the Pharos series, PHAROS. These devices are moderately low power, I think 200, 300 milliwatts. they kind of favor the Ubiquity Pico station, which is a smaller version of the Nano station. They're lower power. They're fairly inexpensive. I don't have personal experience with them, but the fact that they're only 200 or 300 milliwatts kind of turns me off. I'd rather spend the extra money and get the Nano station M2 or M5 if you're going to work on the 5 gigahertz band. Remind me to talk about the bands too. I mentioned that a little at the beginning, but there's some important considerations regarding those too. But so TP-Link is supported by Arden. As well as Ubiquity. They have gone away from the Linksys. Arden has, in fact, that my understanding anyway, and somebody can correct me. My understanding was kind of when Arden splintered off of Broadband Hamnet. There had been some discussion about whether they should continue support for the Linksys routers. They're getting a little long in the tooth. They're pretty much last generation's gear. And some of the guys at Arden, some of the dev team, they wanted to move forward technologically. The BBN folks, they didn't want to leave anybody behind, with legacy gear that was not supported anymore. So there was kind of a rift. BBHN still exists supporting Linksys. Arden has moved on. Their firmware no longer supports Linksys because it can do things that the BBHN firmware could not do, like frequency shift out of the Wi-Fi band. And there's some other bells and whistles. Some of the network monitoring protocol, SNMP, Simple Network Monitoring Protocol, I don't think the Linksys router supports. That's where Arden came about. They basically, many of the dev team from BBHN wanted to take the project in a slightly different direction, and Arden was born. Arden, by the way, I keep mentioning that, it's an acronym for Amateur Radio Emergency Data Network, AREDN. .org. You can Google them and really find a wealth of information. They have a great website with a lot of how-to articles, a good forum section that's growing daily. In fact, I need to do an update on the forum one of these days. But don't neglect Broadband Hamnet, too. They are still a good wealth of information, and since they've been around a number of years, you can find a lot of articles in there. You just have to look at the date that it was posted, because many of these topics have been updated since they were posted. So bbhn.org or Arden, AREDN.org. There's other organizations out there, though, that are using mesh very constructively, and you can read how they are doing that. The Orange County OC Mesh, Orange County Mesh in California, also Santa Clara County Mesh. Heart of Texas, what they call HOTARC, HOTARC, and I don't know if it's a .org or not, but you can Google HOTARC, Heart of Texas Amateur Radio Club. In the Hill Country, they go from Waco around in that area all the way down Austin, west of Austin. Many of those links are not RF links.
Maybe a laptop or a tablet,
internet
or maybe you're looking for a way to charge your batteries when there's no power.
You can look
Gigaparts has stuff like this. Head on over to gigaparts.com and check them out. At checkout, use the coupon code of EHR07 to get $10 off a purchase of $150 or more. This coupon is valid until August the 18th, 2016, so head on over there and check them out. And we're back with David Erickson, KB5UGF. We're going to continue our talk about MeshNet. David, let's talk a little bit about the actual network itself. From what I'm understanding from what you were saying earlier, is it like a self-healing type network? Or like self-discovery? Or how exactly does that work?
Okay, Curtis. Yeah, earlier on, when I was talking about the elements of the firmware that are burned into the new router, the modified router, one of the elements is called OLSR, or Optimized Link State Routing. And this is the routing protocol that basically handles the traffic flow automatically, I might add. It doesn't involve any intervention of the person. All you really need to do is stick this thing up in the air and aim it at another node, and it does the rest. The mesh, once it sees that node, or once the next node sees it, it relays the information about that node, what its signal strength is, what the link quality is. It becomes part of the OLSR data package that is constantly handed from node to node. So you got a node A and node B, maybe they're 10 miles apart from each other, and all of a sudden, kind of off to the side, you have a node C that pops up, sort of in the middle, making a triangle. Well, now, as soon as it materializes, as soon as it comes on the scene and is powered up, node A and node B both make note of its presence, and the OLSR that resides on them can decide, well, now, is the best path to go straight from A to B, or is it to go through C first and then through back to B? And maybe the link from A to B isn't all that good. You have what's called a transmission cost, and it's weighed by the link quality as well as the speed. If your signal to noise ratio is too low, the radio automatically dials back the speed to compensate, so there's less lost packets. All this is factored in by the OLSR automatically in determining what route to take. And it'll then route the traffic through the best possible route at any given time. This is all calculated several times a second automatically, and it doesn't really use a lot of overhead as far as bandwidth. It does use a little bit. That's why you won't see, even under perfect conditions, you won't see quite the speed that you would get with, say, the Ubiquity AirMax so the AirOS software running with the AirMax feature gets pretty close to the theoretical 130 megabits per second. You won't get quite that, but you'll get close. Things that limit it not only are your speed, are not only the OLSR overhead, but the fact that since we use a 10 megahertz channel, that's an automatic divide by 2 right there. Cuts your speed in half. And then every time you have a hop through another node, bear in mind each node has to read the data from one node and then retransmit it on to the next node. So there's another divide by 2. So that's another good incentive. Even though it's capable of going many hops, it's desirable to route your data through as few hops as possible. And that's something the OLSR takes into consideration when it's planning those routes. Now, if something happens, say your node blows down, or you're in a mobile node, or which I do have, by the way. I have a mag mount base that I took a small piece of PVC and another Ubiquity bullet and a little high gain router antenna, and it's all. I'll have to send you a picture, Curtis. It's hysterical. And it's got a yellow Cat 5 cable coming out of the side of it instead of a coax. So I know it's got to be, there's some raised eyebrows when I'm driving down the street, people wondering what in the world kind of antenna that is. But that's my mobile mesh node. And as I'm driving around, of course, my parameters are constantly changing as far as what node is seeing me and what node I'm seeing. And the system, much like the cell phone industry, automatically routes your cell phone calls as you are moving from point to point. In fact, the cell phone industry uses OLSR 2, also, I should say, not number 2, but in addition, same as this mesh network. They use optimized link state routing to handle your phone calls from tower to tower, and as you move out of range of one tower into the range of another, it automatically shifts your phone calls. So if your node disappears, assuming there's enough other nodes around to pick up the slack, your the data traffic that was passing through your node from one node to another is automatically routed somewhere else. So yes, it's self-discovering. As soon as you get on the air and you're visible to another node, the entire mesh is aware of your presence and that you are available for handling traffic. And likewise, if you pull the plug on it, or it blows down, or you move from one location to another, and your node disappears from that spot, the mesh lives on, assuming that there's enough nodes to pick up the slack there.
So, if the routers adjust for speed, I guess really if you have, like in your example, your A, B, and C, if A and B had poor packet quality and dialed back the speed to compensate, and then C popped up, it could technically, or maybe theoretically, or maybe actually, be faster to go from A to C to B than it would be from A to B.
That's correct, and I have a perfect working example of that in our mesh right now. We recently established kind of a improvised RF link to the Ellis County group down in Midlothian, and they're aimed in our general direction towards one of our principal nodes in southeast Mansfield. The only problem is that node is a sector type antenna, which a sector covers a portion of what an omni would cover. This covers an 120 degree sector of space, and that space happens to be facing away from Midlothian, 8 miles away. Well, when I connect to Midlothian, I can do a trace route on my DOS command prompt, and I can put in the IP address of the Midlothian node. Marley, be quiet. Go on. Marley hears something outside there. He's getting a little excited, so sorry for the distraction. I can trace the route that the packets are taking. Sometimes it will go to the through the MJARS node straight to Midlothian off the back side of that antenna 8 miles away. But it's kind of a marginal link. Oftentimes when I do the trace route, I will see my data go to that MJARS node and go 4 miles out of its way to one of our members' nodes, that's 50 feet up northwest Mansfield, and then finally go to the Midlothian node, which is now 12 miles away. So it's not a consistent pattern. It's just whatever route's the best route at any given time. That's what it automatically chooses.
So, speaking of antennas, do you, for just any everyday person or whatever, somebody that's actually not maybe actually trying to build a specific path or something like that, like you were talking about between Mansfield and Midlothian, would you just use a omnidirectional antenna, or would it be better to use a directional antenna if you're trying to get somewhere specific, or what?
My go-to radio, and this isn't just me, I would say pretty much the entire mesh community would have to be pretty much in agreement on this. In this day and time is the Ubiquity Nano station, and if you're going to do it on the 13 centimeter band, you get the M2, Mic 2 for 2.4 gigahertz. They also have a version for the 5 gigahertz band. And don't let me get out of here without talking about the bands. There's a lot to be said about that. They also have one, the M3 for the 3.4 gigahertz band, and I'm going to interject that right now. We're in jeopardy of losing the 3.4 gigahertz band to commercial interests. There are right now no commercial interest license on the 3.4 gigahertz ham band. It is strictly for ham use as a secondary user to some military radar, which, to the best of my knowledge, is not used at all in this area. And in fact, in most areas around the country, it's not in use. The equipment is available as export equipment. There are several companies that sell it if you present your ham radio call sign. Some require actually a facsimile of your license, and then they will sell you the equipment in this country for ham radio use only. It's a great band. It's dead quiet. The equipment's more expensive because it is produced in such limited quantities compared to the 13 centimeter and then the 5.8 gigahertz gear. It's about 50% more in cost. But the reason I favor the Nano station, it's just it's an all-in-one unit about the size of a large doorbell chime, which is not it's 11 inches tall. It's 3 inches wide, and it's only about 2 inches thick. It's tiny, and it just does so much. We have a member who has one inside his apartment. He's behind our sector antenna a mile. He's got restrictions in an apartment complex. He can't have outside antennas. He's shooting it at the back side of that sector through a brick wall, through a radiant barrier, and he still has a solid connection. It's not great, and it kind of goes up and down, but considering that, it's amazing what this can do. And then when we hooked up with Ellis County, it got even more amazing that their beam, that they've got a dish down there, 8 miles, well, from Bart it's 7 miles, and they're hitting the backside of Bart's Nano station inside his apartment with still about 20 decibel signal to noise ratio. It's, this is just unbelievable. I mean, you couldn't even think of doing that with the old Linksys routers. You would be lucky to get out of the apartment complex with it. So, but another thing, back to the bands, the 3.4 gigahertz band. I don't remember how many distinct channels there are, and by channels, it's crazy how they do Wi-Fi and broadband communications. They designate the channels as being 5 megahertz wide from one channel to the next, the space. But your actual signal may be 5, it may be 10, it may be 20, just depending on what you send, what you set it up to. So usually there's an overlap, like with conventional Wi-Fi that you're used to, and you set your Wi-Fi to channel 6. That's where it's centered. You're actually using part of 3. You're using all of 4 and 5. Part of 4. You're using all of 5, 6, and 7, and part of 8. So there's a big overlap. Another reason why I use 10 megahertz, because we're not overlapping with anybody. There is only really one 10 megahertz wide channel that we can use on 2.4 gigahertz. There's something like 20 something on 3.4 gigahertz. It's wide open, and like I said, it's dead quiet because there's no competition from any other services. 5.8 gigahertz is also pretty good too, because there are 7 at the top of the band. There are 7 ham only frequencies that are not shared with Wi-Fi. That's a good one to use too. You have more of a path loss with the higher frequencies due to absorption in the atmosphere by the atmosphere itself and by impurities in the atmosphere. But that's usually offset by the extra gain. You probably, I don't know if this was a test for the general license or not, a test question. I remember it popping up somewhere. But for a given size antenna, your gain goes up with frequency. So if you have say a sector antenna that's half a square foot on 2.4 gigahertz, you might get 10 or 11 decibels out of it, or you're going to get several decibels more out of that same size antenna on 5.8 gigahertz. And that usually offsets the path loss. So, but trees, buildings, all of those are even more of a factor the higher you go in frequency. Very important issue for anybody considering getting involved in ham radio is an honest assessment of your location. This is not like a 2-meter radio. It's not even like a 440 radio, 70 centimeter. And you probably noticed this, Curtis, how much better the signals are on the lower frequencies, on the VHF frequencies, than they are on the UHF frequencies as far as interacting with buildings and hills and things. That's why so many public service agencies in rural areas still use the VHF high band, because it just is so much better than all these UHF frequencies that most public service agencies in the suburbs and the urban areas have gone to at going great distances. So you need to do a honest evaluation of the path from your location to where the next node is, and make sure it's good and clear. Not only line of sight, but an extra margin, because there's a boundary layer known as the Fresnel zone, which is basically an area that if it's encroached upon, it creates all kinds of multi-path havoc on your received signal, and it can cancel out a lot of your signal. So you can analyze your path before you spend a dime on any equipment. You can go to Ubiquity's own RF Link calculator. You can Google that and find that. It's just Ubiquity RF Link calculator. I use it daily just to look at potential routes. There's other sources out there that aren't quite as user-friendly. A lot of hams, like the Radio Mobile app, use the web app. It's easier to use than the standalone app. The standalone app is a real pain to set up. And then there's another one called Hey, What's That? That's a kind of a good program. Some of our members use that. But I like the Ubiquity Rf Link Map because you can do satellite imagery overlays as well as streets. And it shows you a contour between the two paths, complete with the Fresnel zone up in the upper right corner. You set up the band you're going to use. You set up the gain of the antenna on each end. You set up the bandwidth, and it tells you what your expected signal to noise ratio, your expected signal level should be. It does not know what the noise is in the area. That's going to be something you'll have to experiment with. But, so basically that's you wanted me to mention what it takes to get started. Well, without spending a dime, that's the first thing a person should do is an honest evaluation as to whether, if you live in a valley and the next node is on the next valley with a hill in between, it's not going to be feasible to try to set up an RF link and microwave frequencies to do that. And maybe there's a ham that lives up on the hill that would be willing to let you put a node up on his tower. Then you're in like Flint. That doesn't everybody wish they knew somebody like that? Uh-huh. So, but then if you do find that you do have a suitable location, and it's not too terribly far away. When I say too terribly far, it depends on the equipment. It depends on how good the location is. It's not uncommon to get links that are like 20 miles apart. Like I said, we've got one here that's 14 miles, and they've got one down in the hill country that's 20 miles. So it's possible. It's not very common though. It's so flat in Texas though. If you can find a good high structure, you can go a long way with a microwave signal. And then we talked about the equipment. At least the radio aspect, the radio antenna. And the reason I've really pushed the Ubiquity Nano station is because it's an integrated system. It's got a sector, or also known as a panel antenna, that's integrated into the device. The radio and antenna is right there. All you got to do is mount it to something and plug a Cat5 cable into it. I would get a UV shielded cable. You can get generic ones, or Ubiquity sells theirs. They're a little pricey, but the UV shielding keeps the jacket from deteriorating in the hot sun, in the hot Texas sun after 2 or 3 years. Plus, if it's got a shielded jacket, it tends to shed static, which, as you know, is not very friendly for modern ham radio equipment that has a lot of gas FETs in the front end and things. It's not like the old tube days where you can leave your stuff unprotected and not worry about nearby lightning strikes. So and get one long enough to go from where you're going to mount the device, the Nano station or whatever you get, into your shack. The Nano station comes with the other stuff you need. It comes with its own little power supply that you plug in the wall. It's called a power over Ethernet adapter. It's got 2 Ethernet plugs. One is powered, that goes to the radio. The other is just a LAN connection that you'd hook to your computer. And then what else do you need? Well, you're going to need a short Cat5 cable from that to your computer, obviously. That's really all you need to get started. If you're serious about using this for MCOM purposes, I would immediately consider getting what's called a passive power over Ethernet adapter, or injector, actually is what it's called. And you can get one for less than $5 on Amazon or eBay or wherever. And that way you can feed it with 12 volts. The Ubiquity devices are very forgiving on the voltage they operate on. I'm worried about long cable runs depleting, creating too much of a voltage drop when we're running on battery. If the power goes out at one of our key locations, we've got battery backup, a 12-volt battery at the bottom of the tower, and it's about 200 something feet to the top. And I've calculated the voltage drop using various gauges of wire and not using the Cat5 versus using the Cat5. And basically, I've come up with about a 2-volt, anywhere from a 1 to 2-volt drop, just depending on how we configure it. You can these devices are very voltage. They operate under a very wide range of voltages. They're rated at 24 volts. That's the most you want to put into it. And the power supply, the PoE that you get with it is a 24 volt PoE. That'll overcome just about any kind of cable loss you expect to encounter. I was experimenting with a camera and a node hooked up to my bench variable power supply, and wanted to see just how they would do under extremely low voltages. Say a 12-volt battery through a long cable run, and they were still performing quite well down to 10 volts. I think some people would say that 10.5 is as low as you'd want to run the actual router, because then data throughput starts to suffer. I didn't have a way to test that, but I was looking at my signal level as seen from another node as I was lowering the voltage, and I didn't see any change in signal level. But then again, I wasn't driving any large amounts of data through it at the same time. But it's safe to say that it's pretty MCOM friendly to run on 12 volts, even under long cable runs, even through Cat5, which is generally pairs of two twisted pairs of 24 gauge wire that feed the power. So you're basically, when you calculate your voltage drop, there's calculators online. You can save yourself the trouble, but you actually got two powered twisted pairs under a power over Ethernet arrangement. So I think I probably drifted off course there. Bring me back, Curtis. What's the next question?
Well, I think you pretty much answered everything I got. Actually, last question here before we leave. What all can you do with MeshNet?
That's really important, because it's an important consideration to know that a mesh network in itself is a highway. It's like the internet. It's like your home office. It is a physical and electrical medium for doing things. It does not do anything in and of itself. It's just, it's the highway. What you do with it are the vehicles that operate on that highway. So, and as I said way at the beginning, basically anything digital can go over this. Now, there's quite a few caveats to that. This is Part 97. This is ham radio. So the same rules apply to mesh networks as would apply to any other ham radio medium regarding content. Nothing commercial, nothing obscene, no music. Identification every 10 minutes. Well, there again, that part is automated for you. You don't need to worry about it. Your home node screen, when you set up your mesh node, it will not boot up. It will not let you save an invalid node name. You have to put your ham radio call sign as the first part of your mesh node name. Now, that's not the SSID or the service set identifier that you see when you scan Wi-Fi. That's something different. You won't see our SSID on a Wi-Fi scan because it's not in the Wi-Fi band, but you can use it in the Wi-Fi band because large segments of the Wi-Fi band are also in the ham band, and that's how we started, was sharing Wi-Fi. And you do a Wi-Fi scan, what you will see is Arden -V3, which is the version, dash, and then 2.0 for 20 megahertz or 1.0 for 10 megahertz. It'll be the bandwidth. That will always be the SSID. But your node name, if you were to access the graphic user interface or GUI page you'll see the node status screen, and that always starts with your call sign. So that's one form of ID. Plus, the clever guys at Broadband Hamnet and Arden embed that same call sign in a header packet once every 5 minutes, just to be safe, just to make sure you're well inside that 10-minute guideline. So it's automatically sent in hexadecimal form as part of the header, as part of one of the header packets once every 5 minutes. Now, who's going to be able to see that? Well, some creative hacker that knows how to packet sniff probably could do that, or if the FCC really was interested in actually monitoring air traffic instead of being lawyers and bureaucrats, that they probably could find it. But the rules say you have to ID every 10 minutes. It doesn't say that it can't be, buried deep inside another inside of the transmission. You just have to ID. It's no different than a repeater IDing in Morse code. Well, or CW, I should say. Well, it actually is Morse code because it's not CW, it's FM. But I digress. It doesn't say it has to be ID'd in a form that every person who's listening can interpret directly, So that's how the identification process is taken care of. You don't even have to worry about that. But content is important. You can't, you're not going to be streaming Netflix, or listening to Pandora on it. It's not a substitute for the internet. And this is a very important issue. An internet connection can, and often is, a feature, a service provided to the mesh. I have an internet gateway to our mesh system, and so does one of the guys in Ellis County on his end. But you have to be careful what you do with it. You can't sit there and shop on Amazon. You really can't even bring up websites that have advertising on them, like QRZ. You can go to some place and download a PDF of the QRZ database, which is commercial free, but you can't actually bring up QRZ. Are you still there, Curtis?
Yeah.
Okay, I heard a drop out there. I wanted to make sure we're still on.
Yeah,
okay. So I'm very careful with. In fact, by the way, I'm talking to you right now on a leg of the mesh right here. I'm not actually using an RF link. I'm just using. My laptop is connected by a mesh to Wi-Fi link to my actual mesh LAN system here, which then goes through a managed switch that separates out the internet packets from the mesh packets, and then my internet connection goes to that managed switch also. So I'm actually I can use two networks on my laptop by clicking my little network icon here. And either use the mesh LAN or my actual home LAN, which, if I'm going to be doing anything commercial, I'll switch over to my home LAN, or if I'm going to print something because my printer is on my home LAN, and I just click over there, and then when I'm done, I'll just click back. So I'm actually, I could be sitting in my car a couple miles away with my mobile node on the roof there and be doing the same thing, and it would sound just as good. So.
Very interesting. Well, David, I think that's about all the questions that I have. Is there anything else that you can think of that the listeners might want to know about before we close out?
Yeah, I would have to say that, because most of the people that are listening to this, it's probably new to them. Some of the guys that are already experienced, a lot of this is old information. Some of the ones that are already pretty familiar with this form of ham radio. But, an honest evaluation of your location to see if it's suitable. But also, when you get started, it's really as simple as flashing your node, and there's instructions on Arden's website on how to flash your node, and there's enough Elmers around. I'm certainly available to help anybody with flashing it, because you spend $80 for a Nano station, and you get a little nervous about going in there and performing surgery on the firmware, and you kind of worry about whether you're going to turn it into a brick or not. So there's somebody that can help you do that, or help you not do that, I should say, and get the firmware on there correctly. But and that's all you need to get started. Put it up in the air, power it up, and point it. But as time goes on, you're going to probably want to add some bells and whistles, a camera, or maybe something else. It does help to have just the least inkling of what IP addresses are, static IP addresses, dynamic IP addresses. And most anybody that's been around computers for any length of time is going to know. And if you don't, ask somebody.
That was
sometimes
actually,
you may run across a situation.
That was actually a question I was going to ask you and forgot all about it. I even have it wrote down here. IP addresses. I know that you have to put a static IP address in your node. Where do you get it from? Do you just pick a random number, or what? How do you get an IP address assigned to you, I guess?
Well, when you initially purchase your Ubiquity device, it comes with Ubiquity's Air OS software. And to access the administration page for that, you assign your computer an IP address of 192.168.120. And that's how you access the factory Air OS firmware so that you can flash it. And then once you flash it, now it's got Arden firmware on it. It changes the way it does IP addresses. It now becomes an IP server, what they call DHCP, or Dynamic Host Client Protocol server. It issues out IP addresses to other devices connected to it, including your computer, or if you have a camera or an IP phone. Make sure those devices are DHCP enabled, but if you're like hooked through a managed switch or something, make sure that it's not set up also as an IP server, a DHCP server, because then they'll be fighting each other, and you'll be having IP conflicts, and sometimes things will work, most of the time they won't. So your node becomes the IP host or server for the IP addresses to all the other devices on your own little local area network aspect of the mesh network. It's like a little island that's connected by RF, and then you're aimed at my house, and in my house, then I've got my own little island with a different subnet of IP addresses. But the routing software automatically does the net address translation. It's not really net address translation, but it's like that. It basically lets those two little LAN islands, or however many there are on your mesh, talk to each other. Now, where it generates that IP address is kind of interesting, and this helps avoid collisions from IP addresses being on the, different users having the same IP address. The MAC address, or machine access code, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is what that stands for. It's a very low-level address that's uniquely assigned to each device that's used in a Wi-Fi system, a wireless configuration like what we're doing. It's unique to each device. They're not repeated. Every time they manufacture a new one, it rolls over to the next higher number. The Arden software generates its IP address that it uses from the last 3 hexadecimal figures in your MAC address. So you're never going to see two nodes that have the same IP address. What you will see in rare occasions as meshes become huge is you'll see overlapping groups of IP addresses, because the default is to assign the node an IP address, and then it reserves the next 5 addresses above that also for that node to use to assign out to other devices hooked up to it, like your computer or a camera or a phone or whatever. So I haven't run across that yet, and I've seen probably like 25, well, let's see, 14, about 20 nodes now. I've seen 2 nodes, mine and one of my brothers. One of mine and one of my brothers are the address space is very close to each other, but it doesn't overlap. So That's it with IP addresses. But sometimes you'll plug something in, and you might need to reboot your node to get that new device to take an IP address. But these are all the same things you encounter with any computer gear when you get a new printer or whatever. So anybody that's messed with computers and all at all, it's probably going to, if you encounter this, you're going to know how to handle it anyway.
So, okay, I got that on the local level that your IP address comes from the router. I understand that. I guess what I'm still a little confused about is where your router itself gets its IP address. Does it get it from another DHCP server somewhere else on the mesh? Does it like automatically assign it when it first shows up, or how does the server itself, the router itself, get its IP address?
It generates it from the last 3 characters in your MAC address, which is a unique address that only that unit has. That's where your own router gets its IP address from.
Okay. Well, I do know, like from my last from my blog post I did on this, I do know that there was a guy back in like the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. I cannot remember what his name was. I'll have to look it back and put it in the show notes. But there was a ham radio operator back then that actually bought an entire block of IP addresses. And I'm thinking it's like a 40.0.0.0 block or something like that is just for amateur radio. And like I said, I'll look back in that previous blog post or on some of the other websites and see if I can find it and put in the show notes for tonight. But, David, thank you so very much for coming on.
That's interesting. I haven't. I just wanted to comment on that. Yeah, I'd like you to forward me that.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of that. That's interesting. This system uses a 10 block. Every IP address starts with a 10. It's one of the, I guess, I can't remember. There's 4 blocks that are, I can't remember what the designation is. I read about this a couple of years ago, and I can't remember. But 192 block, you see that all the time with a lot of consumer gear. Broadband Hamnet used to use, I think it was 172. I can't remember. The 10 block is what they have gone to. Why? I don't know. I guess it's for whatever reason. I'm sure somebody has a good explanation. So that's what you'll see for an Arden network. All the IP addresses will start with a 10. And thank you, Curtis. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's been fun, and I hope some people get a lot of information out of this in between all the rambling I was doing. And feel free to email me at my call sign, Kilo Bravo 5 Uniform Golf Foxtrot at gmail.com or at ARRL.com or at winlink.com. And by the way, Winlink is another great tool that you can use on mesh networking. It's very high speed. If you go right from mesh to internet, you can transfer files up to 5 megabytes using WinLink, whereas you're limited to 100, 150K or something on HF versions of WinLink. You use the Telnet protocol, and eventually we hope to have a RF gateway, a WinLink, a mesh to probably 2 meters. Unfortunately, I'd like to use 220, but there's no RMS gateways that will run on 220. So we're working on that. Incorporate WinLink. It's a great MCOM tool for emails and file attachments, getting them out of the affected areas during a disaster.
Very cool. Once again, thank you so very much for coming on. I will be contacting you a little later about some of the other questions that I have for me personally and for this area here. So I'll be contacting you a little later on that. But yeah, thank you very much, and I hope that all y'all out there got something out of this conversation here that we had with David. And if you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments of the show notes. You can find the show notes again at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/29. That's the number 29. leave a comment there below if you have any questions for David or for myself, and I will make sure they get answered one way or the other. And please let me know what you thought about it. And yeah, so I guess that's about it. David, thank you very much for coming on, and I guess 73 on your final, sir.
Well, thank you very much yourself, Curtis. Thanks for inviting me, and I hope to talk to you soon, and I'll be glad to field any questions. And I'm certainly no expert. I'm certainly there's some aspects of this that there's some of your listeners probably have a lot more knowledge on. I'm all ears. I learn every day, and I sure I want to keep learning. So thanks again, Curtis, and 73 to everybody.
Okay, everybody, just to kind of talk a little bit more about what we were talking about there at the end with the IP addresses. I had remembered reading somewhere, and I could not for the life of me remember where. I mean, I had looked on like 20 different websites and previous blog posts and anywhere I could think of where I had read about this block of IP addresses that were dedicated for amateur radio. Well, I finally remembered it. It is in the High-Speed Multimedia for Amateur Radio book that's published by the ARRL. And I'm just going to kind of take this little section of this book here and read it to y'all. And I hope that I don't get in trouble for it. Anyways, it says that in the late 1970s, long before the creation of public internet as we know it, Dr. Hank Magnuski, Kilo Alpha 6 Mike, had an incredible foresight to register the entire Class A IP address range, that's 16.7 million IP addresses for amateur radio use. The entire Whoa, what happened here? The entire address block of 44.0.0.0/8 is allocated for ham use, and any licensed ham can request a sub-block of this address range for free through AMPRNet. With the internet now out of IP version 4 address allocations, the AMPRNet block of addresses is very valuable real estate indeed. This block of public addresses allows hams to access and link their networks directly to the public internet and to other amateur radio networks. For more information on requesting and receiving a block of public IP addresses for your network, please visit the AMPRNet website at ampr.org. So, there you go. That, 16.7 million IP addresses that we would never use all that. So, yeah. And I have forwarded that little block of information there to David as well. But I thought that y'all would like to know what I found out. So anyways, let's get a couple announcements out of the way before we go on with our club spotlight for this month. Again, I want to remind everybody the Gigaparts discount code. You get $10 off when you purchase $150. I know $150 is a lot of money sometimes, and I'm hoping that that y'all will take up this offer of this $10 off. Anyways, when you go there, find stuff that you want. Once you get that $150 mark, or you've ran out of stuff that you want to buy, at checkout, enter the coupon code of EHR07, and you'll get that $10 off. It is good until August the 18th, 2016. So, if you haven't already, please head on over to gigaparts.com and check that out, and buy your $150 worth for $140. Also, last episode we had started our GMAG giveaway. There is a link in the show notes to what exactly the GMAG is, and basically it is a saltwater AA battery charger. It's very neat. I have looked at it. I have it at my house right now, and basically it has a tank, like a water tank on the back side of the charger. You to put like 2 tablespoons or 2 teaspoons, I think, of salt and in this little fuel cell area and mix it with water, and this charger will charge up your batteries. And it takes 40 minutes to do 2 AA batteries. It takes 120 minutes to do 4 AA batteries, or 2 hours to do 6. And it requires no plug. It requires no solar cells, no wind cells, nothing like that. It's all done with salt water. So this would be a really great thing to have for when you're out in the middle of nowhere or standing a post on some emergency or something like that, and you can't charge your batteries. Stick this in your a backpack or a fanny pack or something like that, and have AA batteries charged and ready to go in case something happens to your regular HT battery or your flashlight or something like that. So this week, if you want to enter the raffle, this will be your second entry. Last entry, you'll have to go and listen to it to find out what the code is. But for this entry, I think send me an email at k5clm@everythinghamradio.com, and in the subject line put, how about just put GMAG, GMAG, and that is how you enter it for this episode. After this episode, the contest will end on August the 6th at 12 a.m. Maybe it'll be August the 5th. Anyways, on Saturday, come Saturday morning, you won't be able to enter anymore. So Friday night, 11:59, there you go, that's the way it works. August 5th, 11:59 p.m. will be the cutoff for entering the raffle. Yeah. And on the 6th, when I record the episode, I will put a random number generator, put in the high or the low number, and put in however many people have entered, and pick a random number, and that's who will win it. And I will be in contact with you shortly after that. Okay, next on my list of announcements here, my wife's blog. As many of you have heard over the past probably 2 or 3 months, my wife has her very own blog after complaining about my blogging. She finally decided to do it and has started her own blog. And this blog is about our journey through the foster care system. Being parents of foster care, in foster care right now, we have 5 beautiful daughters, 2, 3, 9, 11, and 12. And it can be a handful at times, and it can be extremely rewarding at times. So, actually all the time. But if you want to read more about our journey, and even just some general parenting advice, I mean, anybody can use this stuff that we're putting on here. It's not just a foster care. Anyway, head on over to morethansafe.com and check that out. While you're there, if you want to, if you like what you read there, subscribe to the email list, and you'll get an email whenever new post is published for that. Also, one last thing. If you'd like what you hear here on this podcast, on my blog, which I haven't really wrote a whole lot for, and shame on me for that. But anyways, if you like what you hear and you want to help out more, there's several ways to do it. You can do a one-time donation through PayPal. You can sign up to be a monthly contributor through Patreon, or just shop through Amazon.com using my affiliate link. I get a small commission on anything that you buy, and the price won't change for you at all. So head on over to everythinghamradio.com/support to find out more information about that. Okay, let's go ahead and get to our Amateur Radio Club Spotlight for today. Hey everybody, so for the Spotlight of today, we're going to be talking about the Lake of the Ozarks Amateur Radio Club. You can locate them on their website at www.loarc.com. They also have a Twitter account that I noticed. However, the last post that I saw was from 2013, so I don't know if it's still active or not, but you can find them at twitter.com/HAMLOARC. It's HAMLOARC. They have meetings on the second Wednesday of the month on the second floor of the Mid-County Fire Protection District headquarters, located on Old Highway 5 in Camdenton, and that meeting starts at 7 o'clock. And each Friday at 11:30 a.m. they have informal meetings held at area restaurants for 2 consecutive Fridays. And it changes every 2 Fridays, so, this week and next week they might be at, like, the regular old ham standby of Golden Corral, and the next 2 weeks they might be at Dairy Queen or something. Check their website for information if you live in the area, or if you're going to be in the area on Friday for lunch, go and have some with a group of hams. They have a couple nets that they run. They have a 2-meter net that runs on every Saturday morning at 9 a.m., and it is on 146.730 megahertz. They have a 10-meter net that runs on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. on 28.410. And they, from November to April, they hold a snowbird net on 20 meters, and that runs at 10 a.m. And it runs on 14.255, plus or minus a few, depending on how busy the band is. So, couple of those nets you can check in yourself wherever you are. Probably the 20-meter one you get on a little easier than the 10-meter one, but check on there. Tell them you heard about their net from the Everything Ham Radio podcast. Along with the weekly nets that they do, they also participate in the Camden County Emergency Net that happens once a month on the second Tuesday at 10 a.m. on 146.3 repeater. As far as the repeaters go, they have 2. They have a 2-meter repeater that's on 146.73 with a negative offset and no tone. It is located in, I want to say, Laurie, Missouri. I might have said that wrong, but that's what it looks like. They also have a 70-centimeter repeater at 442.2 with a, looks like a 100 tone. And it's located in Osage Beach, Osage, however you say that. Their website does show it to be under construction. Whether it's actually up or not, I'm not sure, but those are the repeaters that the club owns. As far as activities go, they have their regular meetings. They have weekly informal meetings, or lunch. They participate in field day. They participate in Eagle Day. I'm not sure exactly what that is. I've never heard it. So yeah, if any of y'all know what Eagle Day is, I'm guessing it's sometime in like winter sometime. I don't know if that's the snow day thing, or the snow bird net kind of like thing. But evidently it's some kind of contesting thing. Maybe it's just locally. But if anybody knows what Eagle Day is, please leave it in the show notes, the comment in the show notes, and let me know. Right. Seems like a pretty neat little club, so if you are going to be in the area on one of their meeting nights or one of their net nights, check them out. Everybody's welcome, and I guess that about wraps it up. So, again, this is K5CLM. We are clear of this. Hey everybody, once again I'd like to say thank you for listening to this episode of the Everything Ham Radio podcast. You can find all the links that we've talked about, as well as some additional information in the show notes of today's episode that you can find at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/29. That's the number 29. If you'd like to receive emails on when I publish a new podcast or a new blog post, subscribe to my email list at everythinghamradio.com/subscribe. Also, please follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/everythinghamradio and on Twitter at K5CLM. Also, here recently, within the past week or two, I guess it was now, I have started a YouTube channel. So if you like to listen to the podcast, but you want a little bit more basically just the graphic of my podcast. But if you're on YouTube and you want to listen, you can find me at youtube.com/everythingham radio. So, I guess that about wraps it up for this evening. I really want to, again, say thank you. And if you like what you heard with this episode, please share it with your friends, comment in the show notes, and subscribe to my channels. Until next time, this is K5CLM signing out. 73, y'all.